Did 47 senators commit treason? Well, who's the biggest douchebag? Bill O'Reilly? Or Brian Williams? Or is it a third party? This on today's episode of Screams from the Center. We start out today with the Brian Williams and Bill O'Reilly stories. Basically, Brian Williams lied to his audience and to other speakers and at events about a helicopter ride he took where he said that he came under fire and was even forced down. This turned out to be a lie. I'm not going to go into super detail about it because I actually have a different direction that I'm going with this. And the same with Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly made claims like he saw nuns getting shot in the head. He was at the door of someone associated with the possible Kennedy assassination who committed suicide, and that he saw horrific atrocities committed in the Falkland Islands War. Turns out that those stories, too, are also false. What happens when a journalist or even a public figure on television perpetrates such a lie? Well, in Brian Williams' case, he got 6 months suspension without pay, and Bill O'Reilly is enjoying his media success on Fox so-called news. So, the reality of it is little happens. But the real criminal in this whole thing is not these journalists or political commentators such as Bill O'Reilly. The President of the United States, George Bush, his Vice President, and his entire administration drummed up a war under false pretenses. I'm not saying shaky intel information. They manipulated intel information and outright lied to the American people in order to get us in a war with Iraq. He talked about getting into war with Iraq in 1999. So it's not a surprise that he did this. But we've not seen a prosecution, an accusation in a legal sense even being made against George Bush and his cronies. All we get is dead silence. So my point is, I don't really care too much about what Brian Williams and what Bill O'Reilly say about their wartime experience. They didn't get anybody killed. And typically, when you lie about a record like that, you hurt yourself. Well, unless you're Bill O'Reilly, apparently. But theoretically, you hurt yourself. So, why was this such a big story? Why are we so eager to run with this story and not talk about the lack of prosecution of the Bush administration lying us into a war with Iraq? Well, the simple thing is it's distraction. If Bill O'Reilly and Brian Williams commit a lie or perpetuate a false story, the news network can distance itself from him, they can punish him, or they can do nothing. As long as their ratings, and as long as their corporate sponsorships, and as long as their government endorsement, i.e. political guests coming on, as long as those things stay intact, they'll talk about that story. I mean, after all, it's easier to talk about Brian Williams than it is to talk about how your parent company may be contributing to climate change. See how that works? Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that one. In my next story, did 47 senators who signed Senator Cotton's letter to the Iranian government constitute treason? Did they commit treason? Or did they violate something known as the Logan Act? My opinion is no, they didn't. We'll go over treason in the U.S. and the Logan Act so that we can get a little context of what was going on. But first of all, Senator Cotton and 46 other senators signed a letter basically saying, and you can see this letter online, but they basically were saying that any deal you go into with this president and this administration it requires consent of the Senate, and it can be overturned by the Senate or by future administrations should a Republican become president in 2016. So they essentially told the Iranian government that they can't enter in any deal with the United States. It would be illegal. Well, the problem with this logic is if we entered into a treaty with Iran, the Senate is required to advise and consent. The definition of advise and consent has never been fully established, and we're not going to go into too much detail about that. But this agreement with Iran is part of an international agreement. It's a legal term, and it does not require the Senate's consent or approval. It doesn't require the Senate's input even, or even Congress's opinion as a whole. It is something that the executive branch, as the negotiation power in the United States, actually has the capability of doing. It's up to the voters and up to the policymakers to decide if they're going to act against the president after he's made these commitments. And I don't mean in the sense of voting things that undermine it, basically getting their platform elected and having a future administration overturn it, which can happen at any time with some caveats. It's not as easy to say that, oh, well, we made an agreement with country A on this certain topic, but this new president doesn't want the agreement, so he's going to dissolve it. It doesn't necessarily work that easy. So, now that we've established that legally the Senate really doesn't have any footing for this letter, we'll go over the only crime mentioned in the United States Constitution, and that is treason. The founders were so fearful of the idea of treason because of the abuses of English law regarding it. So, it reads as follows: treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act or confession in open court. Congress shall have the power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood, or forfeiture except during the life of the person attainted. So basically, it means that Congress can figure out what the punishment's going to be. They can't do a sins of the father type of punishment. If you're committed of treason, your kids can't be convicted of treason unless separate charges are brought against them. Also, you can't forfeit anything but your life in this regards, meaning your freedom. I mean, you can sentence them to death, but that's not personally, it's not exactly what is meant by it. So, did these 47 senators rise to this particular circumstance? I don't see how any of these senators did anything that rises to the level of treason. Now, I will say I believe that it's moral treason. They should be forced to resign, voted out of office, censured, condemned in some way publicly about their actions to undermine the negotiating power of the United States, which is in the hands of the President of the United States. So what about the Logan Act? Well, here's the text of the Logan Act. Any citizen of the United States, wherever he may be, who, without authority of the United States, directly or indirectly, commences or carries on any correspondence or intercourse with any foreign government or any officer or agent thereof, with intent to influence the measures or conduct of any foreign government or of any officer or agent thereof, in relation to any disputes or controversies within the United States, or to defeat measures of the United States, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both. This section shall not abridge the right of a citizen to apply himself or his agent to any foreign government or agents thereof, regardless of any injury which he may have sustained from such government or its agents or subjects. So basically that means that private individuals or most individuals can't enter into arms negotiations with a foreign government. They can't enter into peace negotiations or threaten war. They can't do any kind of negotiations that reflect a power that the United States has. They can address grievances. They can, a private individual can try and sue a foreign country in some sort of international court or even our courts or their courts. But that's basically the extent of it that we're talking about. Now, the term authorized is also shaky. And again, did the actions of these senators rise to the level of Logan Act? Well, maybe. It's hard to say. The charge was only levied against one person once in the history of the act, which came into being 1798. Was tried in the early 1800s, and that's about it. If the administration feels that there's a case, it's for the courts to decide. They can push a Logan Act style prosecution, and it'd be up to the courts to decide whether or not the person is guilty, or persons in this case, are guilty. So let's go to what authorization means. The Senate's role in treaties is to advise and consent the president on terms of treaties. So one can say by that extension that they are authorized to produce a letter such as this to a foreign government. And that's a very compelling argument. The Senate advises and consents. If they don't ratify a treaty doesn't go into effect. Now, we've discussed that this doesn't qualify as a treaty, this agreement with Iran, that international agreements are different than treaties. But does that privilege, that advise and consent privilege, translate into direct negotiation powers? That's debatable, and again, I would feel that the court system would have to decide that. However, the one thing I do want to point out about this, which could make it a Logan Act violation, this was not the body that calls itself the Senate acting. This was not even a majority of senators acting. This was one party acting against the president of another party. It was 47 Republicans, not a single Democrat, not a majority of the Senate, nothing. It was the Republican Party using senators to make threats and to undermine the President of the United States. That's plain and simple. That could be interpreted as an unauthorized act and part of a Logan Act violation. I mean, I think in this case we can at least justify calling them moral traitors, and it may be a case for the Logan Act, but I do know that this was done out of politics and not for the good of this country. It's something for you to think about. Please subscribe and like this video. I'll get more out as fast as I can, and thank you for joining in. I appreciate being able to talk to people. Have a good day.